Hello everyone, we are back with episode 3 of our coffee chat on 365 adoption, right? Not 363.
Sometimes
anyway.
you say 365, sometimes
Do I really?
365.
It is 365, 365.
Right, adoption.
Whatever. Okay. Hello, Sarah.
Hi, Daniel.
We are actually in the state of Washington. We are at MVP Summit. Yay!
Yay, we're so excited to be here and the weather's been gorgeous.
Which is weird.
Yeah.
Not a drop of rain.
No, sunny and warm in Seattle in March.
I think that's because of you. Or probably
Nice
me,
thought.
but anyway. So, third episode, we've
Right.
got a treat for you, everyone. But first, I want to just do a 30-second recap of episode 1 and 2. Episode 1, we talked about all of the barriers and the blockers and the disgruntled people. No, but the reasons why adoption goes wrong, right?
Adoption goes wrong, or adoption isn't focused on, or even more importantly, it's treated as a stage in a rollout project as opposed to an overarching service that needs to be done on an ongoing basis at companies. So we really set the stage for why is adoption important, why is it critical, why it needs to be an ongoing service, and the common barriers.
Right. And then we jumped into episode 2, which is all about how we can run events, how we can enable our users with groups, local user groups, company user groups, online user, all of those kind of things to help our users through their adoption journey, right?
Yeah, it was an incredibly fun event. So we talked about things like user groups, as you said. We talked about running even user group sessions like lightning rounds that highlight specific solutions built in Office 365, where you bring in business people to share a business pain point, what they built, and answer questions in a lightning round talk of 10 minutes or less. We talked about running hackathon events in your organization, and depending on your company culture, maybe calling them something other than hackathon events, because that doesn't work in every company. And then we talked about champion programs, like a SharePoint Ninja program or an Office 365 Evangelist Champion program. It was a really cool episode.
Well, I would agree, but I think we're a little biased. So check those out. That'll be in the little information panel of this video for those 2 episodes. So if you need to go check those out, go ahead and do that right now. This episode, though, is completing that journey, as it were, of what are the blockers, and then second episode was here's some things to help you overcome those blockers, but let's apply it to a technology and talk about what that rollout would look like in an organization, how you help your users adopt. And then I might throw you a curveball a little bit here, but I'd like to just make sure we touch on why adoption is not training. Like those 2 words are not equal to each other.
Correct.
So,
or not just training.
Not just
because that could be part of it.
But they're not equal.
They're not equal. They are in fact different.
Like a square is a rectangle, but a rectangle is not a square.
And I think that we should talk about not just applying it to a technology, but full-scale rollouts as well as pilots, because I want to talk about pilots, because they're so important to be able to test things out and road test things. So we're going to talk about both piloting Office 365 products and then the full-scale rollout and adoption for both.
So who gets to pick the technology we're going to use as a sample that we're going to address today? You or I? Or no?
Rock, paper, scissors? That sounds fun.
How about, let's do OneDrive.
Okay.
Are you okay with that?
I'm okay with that.
Okay, let's do OneDrive. So, set the stage. We're in an organization and we have seen a need for utilizing the functionality of OneDrive.
Right.
Okay. And we could talk about whether organizations are already using others or not, sharing kind of technologies, but now we want to roll out OneDrive. We have approval to roll it out, or maybe not. Maybe we need to touch on that a little bit. But what do we do to roll out OneDrive?
Right.
Okay.
Perfect.
So what is the first step, Sarah? What do we do?
I think that the first step is really that you need to take a look at your use case and personas, and you need to make sure that you understand why you're rolling out OneDrive, what business pain points, what business challenges, what technology platforming solutions are you going to look to meet with OneDrive, what are those capability sets, and how can you best approach that to be able to move forward and implement OneDrive successfully. So those user scenarios, they should tie into your user personas. And user personas really simply are a breakdown at a very high level of the types of users that you have in your organization, how they relate to technology, what their technology adeptness is, how they prefer to learn about new technologies. Maybe that's instructor-led training, maybe it's online help videos, maybe it's really self-service of playing with it. So we need to tie those user personas to our user case studies, understand the why, and then we use that to build out a framework for adoption.
Okay, that sounds complicated.
Does it?
Yeah, well, in that there's a lot of steps there. I mean, you just described 3 or 4 steps, and it seems like every one of those steps is going to take some work. So I'm just kind of wanting to make sure we set the expectation that this is not here's a spreadsheet and here's your steps and you're done. You know, this is not a 1 hour kind of situation that you're going to sit down and be done with it and have your whole plan together. And
really quickly to touch on some things. So if this is a new idea for you about the amount of work and effort that's going to go into this, I'd really recommend going back and listening to episode 1 if you haven't already, or maybe giving it a re-listen, because user adoption is almost entirely about what you put into it directly drives what you get out of it in terms of user adoption and lift. Now, at some companies, when you roll out OneDrive, right, they might turn off all of the other areas, right? Maybe they had another file sharing system that they used for sharing files internally and externally, and maybe they're disabling that and migrating all of those documents to OneDrive. Maybe they're shutting down shared drives or programmatically moving shared drive content over to OneDrive. So maybe they're really closing off other avenues, and OneDrive is the location. It's where people have to go. In that type of scenario, that's what I would call a voluntold model or an involuntary model of rolling out OneDrive. So you're not going to measure your success of that user adoption program based on analytics of how many users have documents stored in OneDrive. Because here's the thing, if you're migrating their personal drives over to OneDrive, they're all going to be there. And if you've disabled their ability to save anywhere else, they're going to be there. But that doesn't equate to them having business value derived off of that, it being faster for them, or it being a source of sparking joy, right? And we want it to do all of those things. If you're running a program where you're rolling out OneDrive, but they have other options, then, and I love that kind of an opportunity, because then you really get to appeal to what's in it for them. You get to talk about things, and these are things I love talking about with OneDrive. Find out what the user need is and highlight those. In many organizations, that might be automatic versioning, where you have 500 back versions of every document. If they're used to using shared drives, where they've only got the latest and greatest set of a file, that is a silver bullet feature that could change the lives of those users in terms of being able to see and revert back to previous versions.
Right.
Or the mobile access of using OneDrive mobile, and suddenly if they need to do something at night, they get a text from their boss, they don't have to boot up their laptop and go in and do that. They can simply go into the OneDrive mobile app and be able to do what they need. Controlling and the sharing permissions. There are a lot of great features in OneDrive, but those user case studies of what's key for your organization and your user pain points of what they're needing to solve will help you highlight the features that will be the differentiators for your users, and that's what you focus your adoption efforts on, and that's what you communicate very effectively.
So that's how you get to those personas, right?
Right.
Using that information, coming up those personas. And I've seen you've given some sessions talking about some of those personas before. So,
right.
And I know you've blogged about it. So a little bit of that detail can be, people can get that on your website, right?
Correct. Yep.
Which is, we'll put it right here. It's splibrarian.com/blog.
blog.splibrarian.com, but we'll
Totally
get it
screwed
right.
it up. It'll be right here.
For the video, we'll put the text in there.
Here,
yep.
Somewhere I'll put it.
Yeah.
So blog.splibrarian.com will have some resources already that shows how you can work through that personas. Right. And so the next step, you get the personas of your people. So kind of those that are going to be early, they're gung-ho, they really, really like taking new technology and going at it enthusiastically, and they love it, all the way to those people who are still using a fax machine.
Right.
I'm sorry.
But it happens.
So, and then what's the next step? We have our personas, and then we do...
Right. Assuming that, and I'm going to touch on this really quickly,
Okay.
a lot of companies spend most of their time on the technical bits, right? And the technical bits being making sure that you have OneDrive set up appropriately. Maybe you need to set up conditional access in your Office 365 tenant. If you're going to enable external sharing, you've got to get that all configured. You've got to figure out your policies and all of that. All of those technical bits about how you go ahead and provision that service and you get it configured for your company needs, I'm going to leave all of that out because that's not the adoption focus. So assuming that you have all of that in place, you've gone through your information security testing, you've gotten your approvals, you've done you've got your lower environment, your UAT environment set up, and you've gone through all those controls. Pilot. Let's talk about running a OneDrive pilot.
Okay, but what do you mean by pilot? I think of a pilot as a small group. I think about a pilot in the history that I've seen in other organizations as being a small group, usually the administrator and a manager of some sort, and maybe someone on the help desk, but all in IT. And they test it and they're piloting it, and this is great, and then they roll it out to the organization. Is that what you mean by pilot, Sarah?
Nope. We need to do more than that. And here's why. Because if we take the people that are the same people involved in configuring and putting the technology bits together, they're going to click around a few times. They might even write 10 or 20 or maybe even 50 test cases, click through and perform those, but they're not going to kick the tires of things in the same way and provide the same kind of feedback. You need a cross-section of employees that are going to test, and a pilot is an excellent way to test end-to-end all of your rollout details. So let's talk about what that could mean.
Okay, can I just mention two things? One is you talked about just then, that small IT-focused will not hit all of the functionality that business users will hit, right?
Correct.
And that's one thing you just said.
Yep.
And the second is, I think a big one is that they are, how do you say this? People who work in IT usually will embrace technology a whole lot easier than those in the business. Now, that's an overgeneralization. I totally get it. Overgeneralization, but they're in IT. So,
and I don't want to overly generalize, but they're one segment of the target market. So maybe that's a different way of saying it. And they're one segment, but we need to be able to pilot with different segments of users, different levels of technology adeptness, different business lines, right? So somebody in the legal department, somebody in finance is going to come with an entirely different perspective, and we want all of those different perspectives and flavors in our pilot.
So in the pilot,
yes.
Okay, we need different flavors.
Yes.
We need different types of personas and different types of groups. How big of a pilot is this? I mean, you're looking at Are you looking at one person per department? Are you looking at that could be huge or that could be small depending on the how do you gauge who needs to be in the room?
Right, who needs from to be a pilot perspective. So I start with pilot sizing. And I have a blog post about running an Office 365 pilot, and in it, and there's actually been some interesting dialogue on this, but I make a pretty bold statement about pilot sizing.
Okay,
you ready?
Here we go. We're ready. Let's do it.
And the librarian in me is not normally the math person, but what I like to recommend is let's just start with a flat percentage amount based on the volume of users that you're going to have using OneDrive in your Office 365 tenant. And I say, now granted, we can't use this in every company, but as a rough rule of thumb, let's start with thinking about a pilot that's about 3% of our Office 365 user population, or in this case, 3% of the people that we're going to roll out OneDrive to. So if my math holds, if we have an organization of 10,000 people, 3% of that would be what? A pilot of 300 people, if I've done my math correctly in my head.
Okay.
You're supposed to check the math.
Oh, I don't know that that's right. But
3%.
3%. So, but okay.
You're going to ask me why 3%?
Well, I'm going to immediately jump to the extremes of wait a minute. So 3%. If I have 10 people, that's going to be one person, and one person is 10%. So, if I have...
it doesn't work in extreme situations of that.
That's where I was going.
Well, let's not poke holes. 3% gives you a rough gauge,
Yes,
right?
okay.
So, like I said, he's got the calculator out. 10,000 people, 3%, 300 people. Here's why I say that. If you're rolling out to a 10,000 person organization, and let's go ahead and use that as an example for our conversation today. If you're rolling out to 10,000 users OneDrive, if you invite 300 people to the pilot, do you think all 300 people are going to be active in the pilot and that they're all going to invest the same amount of time in the pilot effort?
Well, I think for your second question, are they going to invest the same amount of effort? No, we all know that. They're not going to invest the same amount of effort. Are they going to be part of the pilot, and actually participate? I think is a question of, it depends. Are you volunteering them, or are you enabling them to organically or utilize it alongside the other types of tools that they may use in the past?
Correct. How interested are they in new technology?
Even if you're volunteering, anyway, even if you force it on them, there's still going to be people in that group that don't do it.
And this 3% idea, right? You might be in an organization where you say, I want to have 10% of my users piloting OneDrive because I want to get as large a cross section of user feedback as I can. Fantastic. I'm not saying artificially limit yourself to 3%, but I oftentimes find when I talk to companies that they want to pilot with a much smaller set of users, and I push 3% because I think it will broaden the feedback that you're going to get, and it will broaden the horizons. And voluntold versus volunteer, not everyone will be able to dedicate time during the time of your pilot. It might be a very busy time for them in their business life cycle, right, or in their business processes, but 3% is just a place to start, right, to be able to talk about that. So in terms of who you want a cross-section. I don't want all technology early adopters. I want people from all over the continuum, from the people that can't wait to get their hands on new technology, are driven by that, those innovators, to early adopters, to even the people who are traditionally more late to adopt. And then I actually would love to be able to set up some time with some people that are typically technology laggards to be able to walk them through OneDrive and get their feedback on the experience. So I want a cross-section from across the business of users.
And it's not just those who might early adopt and not adopt. I would think it's also those who are in totally different roles. And we're not just talking about office people here. We're talking about those that are maybe frontline workers. We're talking about contractors. How would that experience work with people who come in and are there for a brief time? Like how would they onboard? I think you're right. A cross section as to how all of that will work, and get feedback on how it might be difficult. But what are the easy parts? And I'm just thinking, get some of that information so that you can use that when you're communication to the broad audience, right? Hey, here's some of the feedback of how awesome it was. So can we go into what does that rollout look like, or what does that process look like? You've identified those people. There's 3% of your organization. And you're now, what do you do next? You've identified them, invited them, they've all said yes. What do you do?
So first thing before you do your pilot, you need to start preparing your user adoption plan for your full-scale rollout first. That should happen. You should have some communications in mind in terms of how you want to communicate what is OneDrive, what is it we're rolling out, why? Why are we choosing to go after OneDrive? What's in it for me? Have that be specific to the silver bullets for the different user personas. Here are some benefits of running a pilot. It gives you the opportunity to road test those communications and your OneDrive training materials. So you need to have some of that at least prepared ahead of time. And by road testing, I mean sending out the communications that you have put together for a full-scale rollout and sending them to your pilot users is great, because the pilot users might tell you, yeah, but so what? I don't care. I don't find your communications compelling. They're the wrong type of communications, or this communication was great and this one was missing.
Okay, gotcha.
It also enables you to identify what it is that you're missing. I've run pilots before where people tell me, you know what, you're talking to me about all these products, but I don't get it. I need a high level of a definition of what these things are. And it's actually led me to create different custom training classes that ended up being hugely popular. And all of those were identified by the by the pilot testers, because they just weren't part of our original communications and training plans. So that's really important. Second, you really want to make sure that you have tested out your license enablement and your support processes, right? So before when you are rolling out your OneDrive pilot to users, it gives you an opportunity to test out, do you know how to light them up from a licensing perspective? Can you do it well? Does it cause issues? Far better for you to figure out some licensing kerfuffles in the pilot rollout when pilot testers, if you communicate to them, hey, this is going to be available to you on April 1st, and guess what? We had unexpected challenges, and now it's going to be April 2nd or April 4th. Far better to have a pilot user is going to be much more forgiving about that than it's going to look a little bit egg in the face if it's your full-scale rollout. So test that out. Test out your support processes. Make sure your service desk or who's ever going to be supporting OneDrive is set up and ready to go. If you forgot to load support help articles into whatever knowledge base or ticket management system that your service desk uses, this is an excellent opportunity to be able to identify those and get those loaded in. So it helps you foolproof some of those things.
Gotcha.
In addition to that, it really helps you build, of course, a knowledgeable set of users. The goal is that if you take, again, 3% of your target users of OneDrive, and you have 3% of them pilot the product, even if a small percentage of them, 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 of those pilot testers become an enthusiast about OneDrive, you've targeted effectively the features that matter to them. Those people will talk to other people after the rollout. They can be evangelists, they can be change adopters, they can really help to push that forward in the organization.
Okay. So you've worked through the technology, you've worked through communications, and technology, I meant licensing and such, and rolling that out. Where do we get going? You know, we have these scenarios, you know, and the thing that popped into my head, do you do A/B testing? Let's keep that in mind, because I think like with communications, and you know, there's sometimes different ways to roll stuff out.
That's a huge opportunity that I hadn't actually thought of. But what do you like better, flavor A or flavor B?
Right. So
what's better for different markets?
Yeah, you could separate your pilot group and say we'll send the communication this way to this group and this way to this group, and see which one, you know, have them rate it, the communication.
And
whatever, right?
Another great opportunity related to that is, in many cases, for many companies, depending on your industry, if you're in the medical technology industry or the financial services industry, you're going to have compliance policies that you have to enable. Your pilot testing process is a great way to be able to implement those compliance policies, test out which compliance policies work the best, and be able to validate that they're working as you expect. And better to do that in a pilot where your risk level is far different than a full-scale rollout, and then you suddenly realize 2 weeks after you rolled out that your compliance policies aren't running as you needed them to, and now you've opened yourself up to organizational risk.
Right.
So testing out those compliance policies, I wanted to make sure that we mentioned that, because that's another key thing. And if you have multiple ways of going about compliance, it gives you an excellent opportunity to test those. Configuring your data loss prevention rules, for example, scanning OneDrive documents to be able to find out, you know, this one's going to pop because our DLP scanner found that this is a document. It might have data that we don't need. All of those kinds of things are going to require configuration on the back end to be able to make sure that you're not getting false positives, or you can reduce your false positives. All of those are benefits that a pilot's going to give you to make you much more ready for a full-scale rollout. Okay,
so we talked a lot about pilots' benefits. So how do we run these things?
Right. So from a pilot perspective, it really is about putting together communications, identifying volunteers, and in some cases you're probably going to have some people in key roles that you're going to need to be pilot testers. And then you put together the communications, you officially put together your licensing framework for how you're going to turn them on to OneDrive, literally, and then you roll out. And there's a lot that you can do, and some of these ideas apply to both pilots and to full-scale rollouts to support adoption. And I don't want to caveat them as just pilot related. They're really pilot or full-scale rollout, and they're things that I like. First one, getting started scenarios. I love getting started scenarios because if this is a new technology, what better way to be able to offer people the chance to get their feet wet with it than to give them very quick and simple 3 to 5 step processes for being able to learn how to do things. So if we're talking about OneDrive, getting started scenarios, how do I open a document in my OneDrive mobile app? How do I share a file in OneDrive? How do I upload a file? If you can document those in little snippets, and depending again on your users and your culture, you might want to write those out and include them in some of your communications to those users. You might want to record a quick video and upload it to Stream or provide those videos to users. But those getting started scenarios of some of the most commonly done things that can really help them at the 100 level or 200 level set of vanilla procedures that they can do will help them feel confident, and we'll walk them through some test cases, and you don't have to call them test cases, but really those getting started scenarios that will make all the difference.
So I think you can get some of that information though at the beginning when you were talking about what are the pain points of your users and what exactly why are you rolling the technology out in the first place? Right. So use that to get those things you want to document. Well, you want people to be using it with Office. It has better integration with Office, and it's going to. Okay, then document how it integrates with Office and show people.
So I'm in Microsoft Word. I'm creating a document. How on earth do I save it to OneDrive? Right. Getting started scenario, quick and easy, and I can do it. And as a pilot tester, helps me to feel successful right out of the gate.
Yep. Okay. So you've documented those scenarios. We're getting going. Let's say we start rolling it out. We've in OneDrive's case, we've pushed it out through policy or however we're doing it to enable those pilot users. How do we support them? How do we, because there's going to be, that's why you're running a pilot, there's going to be issues. There's going to be people, rather it could be technology issues, it could be person issues. So how do you support that as you're going through?
So one of the things that I really like to do, and I've used it for both pilots and for rollouts, I love having open forums, dialogues, a state of the state, weekly Q&A calls or bi-weekly Q&A calls at large. And it works great for pilot users. It also works great for a rollout. Offer people the ability to come in, join a call, and you can do it via Teams, you can do it whatever meeting place that you have, or even at a conference room if you have people that are geographically located in the same place. But go in, provide some key tips, right? So maybe spend, if it's an hour-long meeting, spend 10 minutes demoing how to do a couple of cool tips, tricks of using OneDrive, and then let people ask you questions. Ask you questions about the technology, ask questions about the pain points. And there's this positive energy that's gained by just letting people ask questions, see what their questions are, be able to document it, and then answer those questions and listen as they talk about some of the things that they've done.
Gotcha.
And with OneDrive you can do this, but I've also done it very successfully when rolling out Flow, Power Apps, and other tools. I love show and tell events. Opportunities where users can come and say, I had this business need and I created a new solution, or I leveraged OneDrive to help me with this business need, or I leveraged Power Apps and Flow. It's so much more compelling to have a business user come in and talk about what they're doing.
Okay.
And then I like to make sure that we're staying connected. If you've rolled out Yammer in your organization, I love creating Yammer groups specific to be able to talk about either Office 365 at large or OneDrive specifically. If it's for a pilot, why not have a private Yammer group for the pilot testers to just go and share information about the pilot?
Hopefully you've rolled out Yammer previously.
If you haven't rolled out Yammer, let's look at some of the other capabilities that you have. It isn't Yammer specific, but it's hosting that open and honest conversation.
Yes.
Where people can see things, react to things, be able to get answers to questions. You could do the same thing via a SharePoint site.
Like a community
for the
and
pilot
SharePoint
group,
side.
a community
it's kind of
communication
like a
site.
forum, kind of.
It really is a level of engagement, so it doesn't have to be Yammer. That's just one idea.
Sure. Yep. So you're giving these weekly or bi-weekly sessions. You're enabling users to even, if they have an issue, they can come and through Yammer or some other tool that you're using to track them and give responses. What else? Do you have any kind of, I'm thinking about like piloting, do you have a kickoff? Do you have here's why, like a presentation kind of deal? Do you just kind of roll it out, via email and video? Or do you have like a big kind of, all right, we're going, and, I
always like to have the ooh-rah-rah, we're going. I like letting the organizational culture drive it. I've worked at organizations where user group events are highly effective at getting people excited. I've worked at companies where those user group events are widely attended by people via Skype for Business or Teams meetings, and they'd much rather attend an event like that virtually than in person, even if they're in the same building. I've worked at other places where having a table with big monitors on it where you can demo OneDrive and call it something, like a OneDrive exposition or a OneDrive information fair, and have an open table where people can come up and see it and play with it and look at it on an iPad or on a phone and on the computer or on a big collab board on a Surface device. Those things can be very compelling, and put it in the cafeteria or next to the cafeteria. I think it really depends on the culture of your organization and what works best, but you want to live out loud. You want to live in a way that users find compelling. And if you don't get it right the first time, or you don't find that people are glomming onto it at first, just keep on trying, keep on iterating, keep on doing something different. That's really the secret sauce behind user adoption. It's try, and then try something else, and then try something else. And as a service, keep focusing on it even after you're done. Rollout of OneDrive and adoption of OneDrive is not a 1 week event, and it's not a 1 month event, and it's not a 1 year event. It's a forever event until you're going to discontinue the service.
So it's kind of keeping in touch, right?
Absolutely.
Making sure that you are engaging as a group who is enabling this pilot group, keeping in touch with them.
Yes.
Right. So making sure that that they know that they have you as a support, and that you're in it with them, and you're there to help them. And then you could take all of those things you've learned. You talked about being able to do something and then try something else. It's a great place to do it in a pilot group.
Right.
Fantastic place, because you can totally mess up or not, just make a little mistake, whatever it is, and then recover from it, because it's a pilot group, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So we've talked about rollouts.
We've talked.
Can we talk about what's coming next? It's going to be a user adoption mailbox Q&A.
It's a lot of words.
Mailbag, user adoption mailbag, Q&A.
Yeah, Q&A. That sounds great. But we're going to put the URL here at the bottom of the screen. We need your questions. We need you to fill out the questions so we can answer those.
So being Office 365
Sarah
folks, we've created a forms form, and the URL is there. So go out and submit your user adoption questions. If you're going to be at SharePoint Fest DC coming up in 2019, we would love to have you come. We're going to actually be at a podcast center recording the episode, and you'll be able to come and ask your questions live.
Just check the schedule. You'll be able to put it on your schedule, so check that. We'll be there live, answer your questions live, but also please fill out the form and give us your feedback. So
that's right.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Sarah, for bringing your insights.
Thank you, Daniel. This
wraps our third episode, but again, we'll be bringing more content via our Q&A session. That's what we're going to call it. And please join us then. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Roll that beautiful bean footage.
Okay.
Coffee bean footage. Get it?
Yeah.